The broken alien princess was offered as an insult. Humanity turned her into a living weapon. The chains were 4th alloy orethene grade, calibrated to press at the exact boundary between endurance and damage. I want you to understand that this level of specificity, the careful engineering of precisely tolerable discomfort, was considered a mark of professionalism in the Dominion's transfer administration. They had thought about it. That was always the thing that left me most tired. 3 airlocks between the transport and the human receiving bay. I counted them. Each one sealed behind me with the sound of a decision being finalized, and I kept my eyes forward and my breathing even because those 2 things were mine and I was not surrendering either of them. They had dressed me in formal court wrappings before the transfer. That bothered me more than the chains. The chains were functional. The wrappings were theater. You dress a thing in court wrappings when the thing is the message and the recipient needs to understand the message was deliberate. I was not a prisoner being transferred. I was a statement being delivered to a species the Dominion regarded as functionally capable but fundamentally beneath serious attention. I was their discarded problem, wrapped carefully so the discard felt intentional. I had 4 years of practice arranging myself around facts I could not change. I had become reasonably good at it. The receiving bay smelled nothing like the intelligence briefings described. 11 briefings over my years in the Dominion's diplomatic apparatus, and every one described human environments as sharp with recycled atmosphere and chemical traces. This bay smelled warm. That was the only word I had for it. I filed it and moved on. Ambassador Voreth occupied the left side of the room with the orethene delegation. He was a man selected for this posting because he could make an insult feel like a courtesy and a courtesy feel like a threat, and he wore the expression of someone watching a plan confirm itself in real time. Wide. Settled. The expression of a person who takes satisfaction in other people's diminishment and has found legitimate work that allows him to do so professionally. 7 humans on the opposite side. I read them in 2 seconds. No visible weapons, though I counted 6 positions where a sidearm could be concealed under formal dress without the line breaking. 3 postures alert, 2 curious, 1 occupied with a data device, and 1 woman at the center who was doing something I had to look at twice to name, because I had not seen it practiced as a deliberate choice in a very long time. She was still. Not suppressed. Not blank. Still the way a structure is still, not because nothing is happening inside it, but because it has decided where it stands and is not in discussion about it. Short hair, gray running through dark. Eyes like water that has sat somewhere long enough to go calm. Her name, I would learn, was Commander Nora Holloway. Voreth gave his speech. I understood it without the translation feed. His phrasing was textbook diplomatic structure, technically courteous, built with considerable skill to be maximally offensive while remaining formally deniable. The word he used to present me was a dual-root construction in high orethene that carries the meaning gift in ceremonial contexts and broken instrument in operational ones. He intended both. He intended the humans to feel the second meaning without being able to formally object to it. He finished. Let the silence sit for the exact length of time calculated to let the weight settle. Then he looked at Holloway and waited. He was waiting for the reaction that would close the ceremony. Offense, or pity, or contempt dressed in diplomatic phrases. Any of those would serve. Holloway looked at him. Then she looked at me. Not at the chains. Not at the wrappings or the symbolic weight of the ceremony around me. At my face. Like my face was the operative part of the room. She said, in orethene, with an accent that would have ended my old linguistics tutor's career on the spot, "Has she eaten today?" 4 years. My jaw was functional. My voice was functional. I simply had no route from that question to any response I had on file. The question assumed I had preferences about food. It assumed my physical condition was a matter worth care rather than administration. It assumed things about me that no official documentation had assumed in 4 years, and I checked those assumptions against my inventory and came back empty. No protocol for this. The fracture in Voreth's smile was small but visible. Holloway did not look at him again. She spoke to the tall officer on her right, Lieutenant Paul Graves, who carried the expression of a man working from a list longer than the available hours, and someone left the room. A chair appeared. Placed at an angle to my right, not facing me directly, not blocking any line of sight, simply present as an option. I recognized the spatial choice. Parallel placement, not confrontational. Either someone had briefed them on ornithine proxemics or they had arrived at it through instinct, and I could not determine which was more unsettling to consider. I did not sit. My legs had been functional throughout everything 4 years had offered, and I had kept them that way as a personal principle. They were among the last things entirely mine. Holloway did not comment. She acknowledged the chair with a gesture that communicated the offer remained open regardless of the current answer, and moved on. The ceremony concluded. Voreth said the formal transfer language in its required sequence. The actual legal transfer had been processed before my transport docked. The chains were a statement, not a procedure. He left with the walk of a man who has confirmed something about himself. Holloway waited until the ornithine delegation was gone. Then she came to stand a few feet from me. Not close enough to require my permission. Far enough that I had room. She said, in standard, at a pace that felt precisely calibrated, "My name is Nora. There is a room ready for you. Not a cell. The lock is on the inside." I looked at her for a long time. Most species find a sustained ornithine direct gaze an occasion to find something else to do with their eyes. Holloway appeared to have misplaced that instinct somewhere she could not locate. She said, "You do not have to say anything. Just walk with me." I had prepared for cruelty. For indifference, for exploitation, for the full taxonomy of what powerful entities do to things they consider acquisitions. I had not prepared for a room with an inside lock and a question about whether I had eaten. There was no protocol. I was furious about the gap. It was the cleanest thing I had access to and I used it to move. The corridor outside was long and white and lit with diffuse light from everywhere at once, no shadows, no contrast, nowhere to disappear. I catalogued this. I also catalogued the ceiling height, generous, built for comfort as a value alongside efficiency. The Dominion built corridors at minimum viable clearance. You spent time in them slightly stooped, which was not an oversight. This corridor had headroom. I walked through it upright and did not examine what that felt like. Holloway walked slightly ahead. Not in the position of an escort. In the position of someone showing a direction to someone who is choosing to follow. The room was small and clean. A bed, a work surface, a window facing deep space. She stepped back to let me enter first. She said, "Food in 20 minutes. You do not have to open the door for it." Then she left. I stood in the center of the room. I looked at the inside lock. Simple. Mechanical. I locked it. Then I stood with my back to the door in the dark between stars in the window in front of me, and I understood that I did not have a framework for what was happening. Cruelty I could navigate. Contempt I had a map for. This, the deliberate, careful, specific acknowledgement that I was a person with preferences and a door I was permitted to lock, I had nothing for this. The food was left outside. I found it an hour later. I ate it standing, facing the window. Outside, the stars did not move. I had not expected to need new maps. I began making them anyway. The medical bay was on level 4. They gave me the ship's layout on the second morning along with the hours the common areas were occupied, information delivered as orientation rather than instruction. I noted the distinction. Dr. Owen Carter introduced himself at the door. Tall, with the quiet of a man who has spent years in rooms where people needed the noise reduced. He held the door and said, "Come in when you are ready." Then he went inside and sat down and waited. I walked in when I was ready. The bay was clean in the way that rooms are clean when the person responsible genuinely cares about the work. Equipment organized by function, not by regulation. Small adjustments made over time by someone who occupies a space rather than merely uses it. I counted 11 items with potential utility. Reflex. I was not planning anything specific. I was simply not going to stop knowing my environment because someone had given me a lock to use. Carter ran the initial assessment without commentary. He moved through it with a calm so thoroughly settled into him that I began to think it was not professional manner but actual internal weather. He worked. He did not comment on what he found, and there was a great deal to find, and that silence was the first official silence I had experienced that was respect rather than indifference. The blood draw caught wrong, needle angle off by a fraction, a small thing. He winced before I registered the discomfort. Then he said, "Sorry. That was clumsy." I looked at the ceiling. 43 tiles. Each slightly varied in the way mass production creates variation, meaning each was technically unique, meaning I was allocating significant cognitive processing to ceiling tile identification at this particular moment. This was a known strategy. I was aware of it. He had apologized. Not as procedure. Not as a phrase delivered on schedule. As a person who had done something imprecisely and found that worth acknowledging. I had been examined by the Dominion's Correction Administration for 14 months. No one apologized for anything during that time. Not the procedures. Not the results of the procedures. Not the intervals between them, which had their own specific quality that I was categorically not thinking about in this room. In this room I was counting ceiling tiles. Carter finished the assessment. Said he would have preliminary results by evening. Said I was welcome to return with questions. Then said, matter of fact, the way a person states a practical reality rather than makes a promise, whatever happened to you before you came here is not what happens here. Not as policy. Just as fact. He went back to his notes. I left. In the corridor I stood still for a moment and was, for the first time in 4 years, not entirely sure where to put my face. Dr. Lynn Baker's office was at the corridor's end. She was shorter than I expected, reading glasses pushed to the top of her head in what I would come to understand was a permanent state rather than a temporary one. She looked up when I arrived and said, "Vera. Come in. Sit or stand, whichever works." I stood. She did not note this down or interpret it aloud. She pulled her own chair from behind her desk, sat with her hands folded in her lap, and waited. She did not ask about what had been done to me. She asked what I had studied. What I had been good at before the Dominion had finished deciding what I was for. Whether I had a preferred language for thinking, which was a question I had never been asked and which I answered before I had decided to answer it, which I was annoyed about afterward. Or a theme, I said, for thinking. Standard for precision. A third language, a minor regional dialect from the Dominion's eastern territories, that I had learned for personal reasons I did not elaborate on. She did not press. She asked about before. Before the postings. Before the function. Before. I had 11 years old filed under categories that had stopped being useful information. She was asking me to open those files in a room I had been in for approximately 7 minutes. I told her I had wanted to study language architecture. How species build grammar as a reflection of what they value. Whether they place the actor or the action first in a sentence. What they encode grammatically versus what they leave to context. She said, "That is a beautiful area." She said it the way you say something simply true, without apparent awareness that she was giving me something I had not been given in a long time. She had moved on before I finished processing it. The session was 50 minutes. At the end she said she would see me the following week if I was willing, and that the sessions were mine, she would not report content to command, and I could use the time however served me, including silence if that was what I needed. I said I would consider it. I came back the following week. I have spent time since then thinking about what that says about my state at the time, and I have not arrived at any comfortable conclusion. On the third week, there was a situation with Private Drew Finn. He was 22, with the high energy of someone who had learned everything about the universe from somewhere other than direct experience and was delighted by all of it regardless. He appeared in the corridor outside the medical bay while I was coming out and said, "Oh, hey," and grabbed my arm to get my attention. I put him on the floor. Not deliberately. Not a decision. It happened before the decision could form, which is what 14 months of a certain kind of administration does to the gap between what a person feels and what a person does. He hit the floor and I was already 3 steps away before my higher cognition supplied the information that this was a human I was not currently in conflict with and he had not been a threat. He sat up. Looked at me. Then said, "Okay, my fault entirely. I should have said something first." He was rubbing his elbow, which I had not been gentle with. He said, without any apparent resentment, "Next time I will knock. Like on a door. But for people." I looked at him. He said, "I am Drew. I am on Marsh's team. We were told you would probably be joining the unit and I wanted to say hello. I should have done it better." He stood, rolled his elbow, decided it was functional, and said, "I will see you around," and walked off. I stood in that corridor for a long time after he disappeared around the turn. I went to Baker's office. She was not scheduled to see me. She saw me anyway. I told her what had happened. She listened. She did not tell me I should not have reacted that way. She did not tell me I was better than my reactions. She just listened, and then said, "What did he do after?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is a person who decided you were worth adjusting to." I did not respond. It felt too large to respond to correctly, and I did not have the right framework yet, so I filed it with the other things accumulating in that category and went back to my room and read the language architecture text Baker had sent to my quarters until the light through the window changed. I finished it before morning. I requested a second one. She sent two. The 8th session, she asked what I wanted. Not needed. Wanted. I sat with the question long enough that she waited it out, which was her way. Long enough to reach past the safe answer, the one that costs nothing because it asks for nothing. I said, "To be useful again. On my own terms." She wrote something down. She said, "Then let us talk about what that might look like." By the dead stars, I should have been more careful in that session. That was the conversation where everything changed direction. I did not notice it happening. I think that was the point. 3 months in, I was cleared for unit integration. Sergeant Cole Marsh ran training at 0600. I had been watching the schedule for 2 weeks. On a Tuesday I showed up at 0558 and sat against the far wall and waited. Marsh walked in at 0600 exactly, saw me, said, "Good, you are earlier than Finn," and went to the equipment board. That was the full extent of the welcome. I found, to my own irritation, that it was exactly right. The unit was 6 people. Marsh, who was built like a structural problem and said what was needed and nothing adjacent to it. Drew Finn, who had apologized for getting put on the floor and then apparently decided we were permanent acquaintances on the basis of that interaction. Corporal Yael Costa, who had the particular focused silence of someone doing a great deal of thinking that she was not going to share unless asked. Private Sam Whitfield, who was excellent with technical systems and deeply invested in a specific ongoing argument about whether a particular field ration constituted food or merely calories. And Lieutenant Graves, who appeared for briefings and then returned to his list. I was faster than all of them in individual movement. Stronger than most by Orathene physiology. Better trained in close-range combat than anyone in the unit. I was worse at trusting that the person to my left would still be there when I needed them. Moving toward a team member instead of away from a threat. Eating in a room with other people without putting my back to the wall and calculating the exits. Marsh said nothing about any of this. On the 4th day he placed me in a paired drill with Costa. She moved clean and economical and did not try to manage me. She worked the drill as if my presence in it was a confirmed fact, not a variable. When I moved wrong she said, "Try this the way you say it to someone whose competence is established and whose specific adjustment is a small and solvable matter." Something in the tension across my shoulders went, very slightly, down. It came back up the next morning. But it had moved. There was a coffee machine in the common room. My biology processes coffee in a way that is difficult to describe accurately except to say it resembles accidentally consuming a mid-range industrial solvent, and I had no interest in it. But I became unreasonably invested in understanding why humans chose it voluntarily. Not the biochemistry. I had the biochemistry. What I could not resolve was the choice. Every human who poured from that machine made a specific face before the first sip. The face of a person who knows exactly what is about to happen and is choosing it anyway. I spent more time thinking about this than was proportionate. I asked Marsh about it once. He considered it for a moment. Then he said, "The second cup is the good one. The first one is just the price." I thought about that for the rest of the day. 6 weeks into unit training, I adapted my Orathene combat framework to integrate with human squad movement patterns. Nobody asked me to do this. It was a logic problem. The Orathene approach is built for small elite units operating with full information and independent judgment. Human squad tactics are built for interdependence, for the assumption that no single unit has complete information, for the understanding that the person to your left has a view you do not and you trust them to use it. The two systems were not designed for each other. They could be made to work together. It was an interesting problem. I spent 3 evenings on it. Left the proposed integration framework on Marsh's data pad before morning training. He read it during the session break. Said nothing. Nodded. Graves read it that afternoon. He came to find me in the corridor and said, "This is good work." I said, "It is a logic exercise." He said, "Those are the best kind." He filed it in the unit's operational record. On a Thursday morning 6 weeks in, I heard a conversation through a door. Graves and another officer, 2 doors down. Corridor acoustics carry what they should not. The other officer said, "Kepler briefing is tomorrow. Is she included?" Graves said, "I think she should be." The other officer said, "Is she ready for that material?" Graves said, "Would you want to be left out?" The other officer said, after a pause, "No." Graves said, "Then she is in it." I stood against the wall in the corridor and did not move for a long moment. In the Dominion's administrative structure, the question would have been, is she controllable? Is she still functional? Is she still ours? The question was, would she want to be left out? I had not been in a framework where that was the operative question in 4 years. I was not certain I had been in one before that. I attended the Kepler briefing the following morning. Sat at the table with the unit. Said 3 things that adjusted the proposed approach. Marsh noted them without comment. Graves incorporated 2 into the final plan. Nobody made a remark about my presence at the table. That was, I was beginning to understand, the point. Late one evening in the common room, most of the unit gone to quarters, I was sitting on the floor by the window with a language architecture text in my lap. Drew came in, went to the cabinet, returned with 2 cups of something that was not coffee, set one near me without requiring me to take it, and sat on the couch and started a game on his device. We sat in that room for 2 hours. He did not ask what I was reading. I did not ask about the game. When I stood to leave he said, "Knight, the way you say it to someone whose presence in the room is a settled and unremarkable fact." I went back to my room. I locked the door from the inside. I stood there for a moment. I was not going to call it belonging. I did not have a reliable framework for belonging and I was not going to apply an unreliable one to a situation still developing. But it was adjacent to something. And the something was adjacent to the reason I had started waking up in the mornings with something resembling a plan for the day. That was enough. For now, that was a complete set of information. The first mission was a border dispute, third-party faction, no Dominion involvement, a logistics installation in contested space requiring assessment and clearing. Marsh briefed us at 0500. I received my operational assignment the same way everyone else received theirs. Same briefing packet. Same mission parameters. Same table. I noted this. I was still noting things that humans apparently considered so obvious they were not worth remarking on. We deployed at 0800. The facility was defended by 43 personnel with standard equipment. Marsh ran the operation using the unit integration framework, including the Orathene adaptations. I was on the east approach with Costa. She moved clean. I moved clean. We cleared our objective in 11 minutes, 4 minutes ahead of the projected timeline, and met the rest of the unit at the extraction point. Marsh looked at the time. Then at me and Costa. Said nothing. Nodded. On the transport back, Drew said, "See, that is the thing about working alongside someone who spent years in Dominion facilities, they know exactly how those buildings are laid out because they have had to sit in 100 of them waiting for decisions." He paused. That came out more depressing than I intended. Costa said, "All useful information has a price." Drew considered this. Said, "That is very philosophical." Costa said, "It is very practical." I sat at the window with the after-action data running in my display and said nothing and felt, without naming it, something adjacent to the word team. The second deployment was 6 weeks later. A Dominion-aligned facility, which Graves noted in the briefing with the careful phrasing of a man saying everything necessary and nothing extra. I had an operational role, a team, and the integration framework. Those 3 things were the relevant facts. We deployed at night. 16 minutes in, I took a hit that would not have happened if I had been running solo. I had moved to the side instead of forward because Costa was holding the forward position and the correct unit movement required me to go to her side, and the round caught my left arm at the outer edge of the protection plating. Costa called it. Drew was on me in 10 seconds. I told him I was functional. He said, "I know, but hold still," in the tone of someone uninterested in my assessment of my own condition, and ran the field patch anyway. We extracted. The objective was secured. My arm was functional within field repair limits. On the transport back, I sat with my left arm resting on my knee and looked at it. The patch was holding. The arm worked. I had moved to Costa's side because it was the correct unit movement. She had been alive to extract because I had moved to her side. I had no words for this that were equal to the fact. So I said nothing. But I came back to it over the following days. The specific calculation, my exposure for her coverage, and the fact that I had run it without hesitation, without treating it as a trade. It had been the correct movement and I had made it, the same way you put your weight on your legs because that is what legs are for. I thought about Marsh's answer about coffee. I thought I might, eventually, understand what he meant. The 3rd deployment. We were clearing an extraction corridor for a human intelligence asset in Dominion-adjacent territory. 3 minutes from the extraction point, we encountered a patrol that had not been in the briefing. 6 personnel, or Athena-aligned, equipped above standard grade. We handled it. In the middle of it, the patrol officer, 3rd caste administrative insignia on his collar, looked at me through the chaos and said, in high Orathene, loud enough to carry, Orathene whelp. "Where is your crown?" The word he used for crown carried, in that register of high Orathene, the specific implication of something taken. Something that was never genuinely yours to hold. The patrol was neutralized. The extraction was completed. We were back on the transport in 8 minutes. Drew looked at me from across the transport. He had caught enough of the language to know something had been said. He said, "What was that about?" I looked at the transport floor. Then at Drew. Then I said, "I was the 4th daughter of the Dominion's ruling caste. They transferred me to your people as a diplomatic statement." 1 sentence. Drew opened his mouth. Closed it. Then said, "Their loss." 2 words. Said the way you say something simply and factually true, without apparent awareness that you were the first person to say it to the person who needed to hear it. I looked back at the floor. Costa said nothing. Marsh said nothing. But Marsh's hand rested briefly on the back of the seat behind mine, which was not an accident and was not nothing, and I filed it with the other things I was running out of categories for. The 4th operation was built on mine. Not entirely mine. Graves' architecture. Marsh's execution planning. Costa and Drew's technical intelligence from the 2nd deployment. But the foundational analysis, the Dominion's internal structure, their deployment logic, the way their administrative facilities stored information because I had sat in those facilities and understood how the people who designed them thought, that was mine. I sat at the operations table in the final planning session and looked at the facility layout on the display and knew that room. Not this specific room. But this type of room. The positioning of personnel, the placement of critical systems, the gap between the emergency protocol and the actual response time that no Dominion administrator would admit existed in any official documentation, but every Orathene who had worked inside those walls knew was there. I knew where the gap was. I told them. Graves said, "You are certain about the response window?" I said, 14 seconds. The protocol says 8. The reality is 14. The people who designed the protocol had never run an actual drill in a functioning facility. Graves said, "That is the approach." The operation ran in 26 minutes. The window was 14 seconds. Every piece of the analysis held. On the transport back I sat at the window and looked at my hands. All 4 fingers on each. I checked both, which was a habit from a time when checking was necessary and which had not stopped being a reflex even though 4 years had passed and 3 successful deployments and nothing here had taken anything from me that I had not chosen to offer. I thought about Holloway asking if I had eaten. I thought about Drew's 2 words. I thought about Baker asking what I wanted and genuinely waiting for the answer. I thought about the inside lock on my door, which I still used every night because it was mine to use and not because I was afraid. I was not the person who had been walked through 3 airlocks in chains. I was not whatever the correction administration had made of me in 14 months. I was not any of those versions. I did not yet have a complete word for what I was instead. But I had the beginning of one. That felt like enough to keep moving toward. I boarded the diplomatic vessel on a Thursday morning. The formal appointment had come 6 weeks after the 4th operation, processed through the Confederacy's diplomatic corps and delivered in a briefing with Holloway, Graves, and 3 administrative officials I had not previously met. The appointment language was precise: Human Confederacy Liaison to the Orathene Dominion. The posting was indefinite. The authority attached to it was significant. I had a title. A human title, which meant it had been given rather than inherited, which meant I had done something to earn it rather than something to survive it. The distinction was everything. I sat in my quarters the evening before departure and thought about what I was carrying back. Not the appointment or the diplomatic credentials. Those were instruments. What I was carrying back had no entry in any Dominion administrative category, because the Dominion had never encountered it and would not have a word for it. I was carrying back the person I had become when someone decided I was worth becoming. The Dominion would not know what to do with that. I was counting on it. Cole Marsh came by the evening before I shipped out. He knocked on the door, which was something he had started doing about 4 months in, and I opened it, which was something I had started doing almost immediately after that. He said, "You are going to be the most dangerous thing in that building." I said, "The building will not know that at first." He said, "Good." He held out a small data chip. I took it. It had, I found later, the full contact protocol for the unit, including the communication channel that officially did not exist for diplomatic personnel. He said, "Check in when it is done." Then he left. Drew knocked 15 minutes after that and gave me a small device he had clearly made himself, a translation aid with 17 Orathene dialects loaded into it, including the Eastern regional dialect I had mentioned once in a conversation months ago, in passing, with no reason to think he had kept that detail. He had kept it. He said, "In case you need to hear something in a language you are comfortable in." I looked at the device. Then I said, "I taught myself that dialect for exactly that reason." He said, "Well, now you have a backup." He left. I sat with the device in my hand for a long time. The diplomatic vessel was a Confederacy ship, crew of 40, civilian classification, small security detail. The journey to Orathene territory took 11 days. I spent them preparing. Not for the speech. I had the speech. It was correct in High Orathene, precise in its formal structure, deniable in the appropriate places and absolutely clear in the subtext to anyone who had grown up inside those rooms. I had been educated for exactly this. I spent the 11 days preparing for what it would feel like to be back inside the gravity of the Dominion's particular world. The weight of it. The way rooms in Dominion space are built for hierarchy to be felt rather than stated. The ceiling heights that vary by the rank of the expected occupants. The lighting calibrated to make certain features of Orathene physiology more visible, which is a way of always knowing where you stand relative to everyone else in the room. I had grown up inside all of that. I had been taken apart inside all of that. I was going back. I thought about Baker's question. "What do you want?" I wanted to walk into those rooms and be someone they could not categorize. I wanted to stand in the place where they had decided I was a broken instrument and be something so completely different that the decision itself became the embarrassing one. I wanted Vorith to have to look at me. That was precise. That was what I wanted. The reception was held in the Dominion secondary diplomatic chamber, not the primary, which was a calibrated insult so slight it was technically deniable. I noted it. I was not insulted by it. I had brought something considerably more substantial. I entered the chamber in Confederacy diplomatic grays. Clean lines. No ornamentation. The kind of clothing that communicates that the person wearing it does not need the clothes to say anything on their behalf. On my left wrist, I wore a bracelet. It was thin. Silver gray. The kind of thing that might be overlooked. It was made from the 4th alloy chains from the receiving bay. I had arranged for them to be kept after the transfer and had them made into this 3 months after I arrived, and I had worn it every day since, and it sat against my pulse point with the specific weight of something repurposed. The Dominion officials registered my rank insignia. I watched the calculations run across their expressions, the rank, the posting, the Confederacy seal on my identification, the fact that I was standing in this chamber in my own authority and my own clothing with nothing on my wrists except something that was mine. Confusion first. Then the arithmetic. Then something that sat in the territory adjacent to alarm. I found this satisfying in a way I was not going to examine in front of an audience. The formal reception moved through its required structure. Introductions, statements of diplomatic position, the ritual exchange of formal recognition. I moved through it with the ease of someone educated for exactly these rooms, which I had been, and which the Dominion had once considered a useful feature of my function. They had not considered that I might one day use it for something else entirely. That was, I believe, the core miscalculation. Voreth was in the third row. I had known he would be. Third-caste administrative ambassadors of his tenure are required to attend formal receptions with Confederacy liaisons. It is standing protocol. I had looked it up. He was older than I remembered. The past 4 years had done something to his edges that administration does when a person has been running the same small satisfactions for too long. He stood with the posture of a man who considers himself successful and has not yet received the information that would revise that. He looked at me. I watched him not recognize me. I watched him look at my rank insignia and file it as relevant. I watched him look at my face and try to locate it. I watched the moment he found it. It arrived in him the way a physical thing arrives, a specific visible impact, a stillness that followed it, a recalculation running behind his eyes that was moving very fast and not arriving at any comfortable conclusion. I held his gaze. He did not have Holloway's quality of stillness. He looked away. My formal address was delivered to the full chamber. I gave it in high Orathene, because I had been educated for exactly this room and because some things deserve to be said in the language of the people who need to hear them, without the distance of translation. The content was diplomatically correct. The Confederacy's position on current territorial questions. The proposed framework for ongoing engagement. The specific mutual interests that both parties would be served by addressing, and the specific mutual interests that only one party currently appeared to be aware they had. The subtext was not diplomatic. The subtext was structural. It was built into the grammar, the specific grammatical choices in high Orathene that communicate whether the speaker considers themselves subordinate to the room or equal with it. I used every coordinate construction I knew. I built the full address in the register of someone who is not asking permission. The Dominion official in the first row heard it. I watched her hear it. Third-generation administrative caste, educated in the same system I had been educated in, she heard every grammatical choice and understood exactly what each one communicated, and when I finished she was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on a Dominion official's face before. It was close to respect. I did not let myself hold on to that. It was a data point. I filed it and moved forward. After the formal reception, the designated social period began. This is the portion of Dominion diplomatic procedure where the real conversations happen, because nothing in the formal address can be informal and there is always an informal layer. Voreth found me by the window. He said, in high Orathene, formal register, liaison vera. You appear to have. He paused, searching for the construction. Adapted well. I looked at him. I had thought about what I would say to him for 6 months. I had prepared several versions, refined them, arrived at something that was not a speech and not a declaration but was, in the grammar of who I had become, the most complete sentence I could give him. I said, they did not adapt me. They simply did not discard what you sent them. He had no response to this. The grammar of it closed every available exit. The subject of the sentence was them. The action was restraint. The object was me. The implied clause, that the Dominion had discarded something of value, was never stated, which meant it could not be formally addressed, but it sat in the air between us with the full weight of something that has been said and cannot be unsaid. He found something else to do with his eyes. I turned back to the window. Outside was Orathene airspace. The stars I had grown up reading about, in the sky I had grown up under, from a city I had been born in and educated in and removed from and was now standing inside again as a different and complete fact. The stars looked exactly the same. I did not. That night, from my diplomatic quarters in the Dominion's guest residence, a functional room with no inner lock, which I had already solved with a piece of furniture because I understood that a locked door was mine and that had not changed, I opened the communication channel on Cole's data chip. I sent 2 words, it went. He responded in 40 seconds, which was fast even accounting for the relay lag, which meant he had been watching the channel. He said, "How exactly did it go?" I sat with my back to the wall and the Orithene night outside the window and thought about how to describe what had happened in that chamber. The arithmetic running across official faces. Voratha's expression when he found mine. The first row official and the thing that had been close to respect. I typed, adequately. He responded immediately, "You absolutely dismantled them, did you not?" I typed, "That is a dramatic characterization." He responded, "Vera." I looked at the screen. At my name, type the way you type the name of someone who is allowed to be known. I typed, "Yes." I sat for a while after that. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at night, the ambient sound of a place that is always partly awake, the light patterns of a civilization continuing to exist, going about the quiet business of its own persistence. I had grown up in this city. The city did not know what to do with the person who had come back to it. That was fine. I knew exactly what I was doing here. I had a specific function, the credentials to execute it, a unit 6 light years away who had sent me back channel protocols and a handmade translation device and 2 words that covered everything else, and a second language architecture text I had not finished yet. Their loss, Drew had said about the Dominion. Their loss. I had spent 4 years being someone's diminishment. The broken instrument, the discarded problem, the thing too complicated to maintain and too visible to discard cleanly. I had been those things, and then I had been walked down a corridor with headroom to a room with a lock on the inside, and I had been asked if I had eaten, and I had been given a chair at a table that no one made a ceremony of, and sessions with a woman who asked what I wanted and waited for the real answer, and grain cup not protein cup because it was better, and a nod that was its own complete sentence, and the word morning said to a person whose presence in the corridor was a settled end. Unremarkable fact. The Dominion sent me to them as a statement. The statement was, "Here is what we think of you. Here is what we have no further use for." And humanity had looked at what was sent to them, and they had given it a room with a lock on the inside and asked if it had eaten, and they had given it a table and 50-minute sessions and training drills and a data chip and a handmade translation device with 17 dialects, and they had asked it what it wanted and genuinely waited, and then they had sent it back. As me. Not as what the Dominion had made. Not as what the Dominion intended. As me, which was the only answer the statement had not prepared for. Tomorrow there were 3 formal meetings scheduled, 2 informal conversations whose architecture I had already planned, and 1 specific administrative process I intended to disrupt from the inside using technically perfect diplomatic procedure. Behind all of that there was language architecture work I had been developing in the margins of briefing documents that I was not going to set aside just because I was also running diplomatic operations. I had wanted to study language architecture at 11 years old. I had not stopped wanting to. I had just gotten delayed. By the dead stars, I was not going to let a delay be the whole story. I closed the communication channel. I sat for another moment with my back against the wall, the Orithene night outside, the bracelet on my wrist with the weight of repurposed things. Then I opened my notes. There was work to do. I had come back as the answer to an insult, which is a complete and satisfying fact, but I had also come back as a person with unfinished work and a plan for tomorrow and a unit who expected a check-in when it was done. I was all of those things simultaneously. The Dominion sent them a broken instrument. Humanity sent back someone who had decided, in full and without reservation, what she was for.